Hi, and welcome to my PowerPoint presentation. My name is Gutama, and today I'll be covering a topic called self-care, creating self-love in the Black community. Before I start my presentation, I'd like to do a land and ancestral acknowledgement. I would like to start by honoring the land that we are on, which has been the site of human activity since time immemorial. It is the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and more recently the Mississauga of the Credit River First Nations. Ontario is covered by 46 treaties and other agreements, and it is home to many Indigenous nations from across Turtle Island, including the Inuit and the Métis. These treaties and other agreements to peaceable share and care for the land and its resources. Other Indigenous nations, Europeans, and newcomers were invited into this covenant in the spirit of respect, peace, and friendship. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, newcomers in this generation and other generations past. We are mindful of broken covenants and we strive to make this right. With the land, with each other, I will also like to acknowledge those of us who came here from forcibly and involuntary, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. And so I honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. My agenda for my PowerPoint presentation is to talk about intergenerational trauma, our own emotional work, and self-care. Intergenerational trauma in the Black community. In the Black community, we don't talk enough about intergenerational trauma. Unfortunately, this leads to families keeping secrets or not having honest and open conversations with one another. This culture of not talking about the root cause of family problems produces the trauma to be passed on to from generation to generation. For example, a lot of people may rely on alcohol or drug abuse to cope with a lot of unresolved trauma, and consequently, this leads to further mental health problems like depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, acting out, making poor sexual health choices in order to please other people, which then become untreated, unresolved trauma. The concept of hurt people. Historical trauma is basically intergenerational trauma experienced by a specific culture group that has a history of being systemically oppressed. It is the cumulative psychological and emotional wounding across generations. So that means understand that the silence is deadly. We need to get away from only talking about violence that occurs outside of the Black community, but be willing to talk about the violence that happens within the Black community. Let's not deal with it on the inside. Let's involve the faith community. Both needs to include accountability. It's not good enough to just love and forgive. We can create a community-driven system. Example, community gang intervention to provide all different kinds of service. Be creative. Ongoing repeated overexposure to a distressing event. Vicarious trauma is when we either see or hear stories that can trigger pain. Many of us, when we saw the video of George Floyd taking a knee to the neck, sadly saw ourselves in that position, our children or our family members. This is an example of vicarious trauma. It doesn't have to happen to me for it to be real. We all have the conversation when we have to talk about being pulled over by the police. It's not if we get pulled over, but rather it's when we will. For example, the Atlantic slave trade. From the very beginning, Black people have experienced trauma through the Atlantic slave trade, where Black ancestors were brutally forced and tortured in the Americas and the Caribbean islands. This trauma was passed down to different generations through historical oppressions. Mental health. We may look to be healthy, but internally there's a lot of pain. These symptoms include hypervigilance, depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, sleeplessness, to name a few. What does intergenerational trauma look like when it's passed down to other generations? Research has shown that any form of trauma will change your brain chemistry. Chronic stress is experienced over a prolonged period of time will create physical and mental health symptoms. Impact of racism. Racism trauma affects most Black people either directly or indirectly. Therefore, race needs to be included in mental health discussions. Impacts of daily experiences of racism also includes depression, anxiety, addiction, and post-traumatic stress, but racism is not often discussed in mainstream health circles. Survival mechanism is the mentality of thinking, how do we maintain versus upper mobility? As a result, this changes the way we think and leads to personality development issues. There's a saying in the Black community that Black folks have to work 3 times as hard as other folks. Discipline children. How parents discipline their children. For example, a Black mother might say that they have to beat their children for disobeying rather than calling the police. Fear. Fear that something bad will happen to you if you challenge or go against the system. As a result of this fear, it creates problems when it comes to emotional regulation. With that fear comes anger. Why are so many Black children angry? They are angry because of the transferring of the intergenerational trauma. Inadequate information. They lack the ability to explain what is happening in the world, not having the appropriate mentors in one life to overcome struggles and challenges, or we choose not to ask for help because we don't want to be viewed as being weak. Self-care. What do you feel like when you're feeling well? Basically, we need to prioritize our self-care. We have the personal responsibility to find ways to de-stress, where we step away from the news, step away from social media, and focus on intentional self-care. Whether that is a massage, engaging in some type of physical activity, hanging out with people that you care about in your community, the goal here is to step away from the triggers that is causing you pain. Remember, we always have the freedom to choose our attitude towards a situation. And self-care and community care is critical to combating the effects of racism and intersectional violence. Self-care and healing. How self-care can support your healing. Number one, creating safe spaces. When you're having a bad day, do you know how to help yourself? Are you able to ground yourself and process those emotions that you're currently feeling? This is where creating those safe spaces helps you face your uncomfortable feelings and then allows you to understand those feelings, feelings such as fear, joy, anger, sadness, and disgust. You might be asking, how do I create a safe space for myself? Well, a safe space will differ from one person to another. In other words, there is no way of creating a one-way safe space. What they all have in common is that a safe space should be a place of peace and serenity. An example of creating a safe space could be waking up early in the morning before going to work or school or family commitment and doing what makes you happy, which could be meditating, praying, reading a book, writing in a journal, exercising, or participating in a hobby of your interest. Number two, seeking community or professional support. Community care is vital to everyone's self-care. The COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us how important being in your community is to overall self-care and well-being. Community service and volunteering have a level of respect in your community, brings so much value in your lives. It's not just like COVID-19, but numerous research studies have proven that the more a person interacts with their community, the happier they feel. Therefore, you need to enjoy people's company, and most importantly, you should provide good energy. Unfortunately, sometimes we have lost connections in our community. Seeking professional support when you feel isolated is the first step towards recovery, especially when feeling down or not yourself. Counselors will focus on your growth and will not dismiss your feelings. Counselors will help you unpack those feelings and bring the language so the average person can understand. If you need help, seek community members and professionals who practice from an intersectional and anti-oppression approach. 3, take time for yourself. You need to take care of yourself first and replenish your energy. The metaphor that usually gets mentioned is the put your oxygen mask first instructions when flying a plane. This is an important rule in survival. We need to always have this laser focus. Always remember, I cannot care for anyone or anything before I care for myself. This is where replenishing energy comes into play. The best way to replenish energy is by getting enough sleep and drinking plenty of water. We all know that humans need 7 to 9 hours to sleep. Sounds simple and easy to do, but how many of us are actually getting that much out of our sleep? Also, there's many research studies that state water deprivation can negatively impact your mood. Number 4, physical activity as a stress reliever. Physical activity releases stress to calm you. It will improve your mood, will help you think clearly. Physical activity will give you more energy and stamina. It will improve your quality of sleep, reduces your risk of developing heart disease and stroke, and helps you feel better about how you look. Number 5, embrace your community. Why is community important to mental health? We're social beings and we're not meant to live in isolation. Community is critical for us to thrive, especially for someone with mental illness. The three of the most important aspects of how community supports a person's mental health are belonging, support, and purpose. Belonging, everyone brings a special quality and contribution to their community. Support, having someone to check in on you when you're sick or when you experience a traumatic event is priceless and life-saving. And finally, purpose. Finding purpose greater than oneself brings overall happiness. When you provide service or support to someone else in your community, it can provide you with a greater feeling of joy. Number 6, get in touch with your emotions. When you're in touch with your feelings, you have a better understanding of your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Having the power to control your feeling allows you to be better equipped when you experience some obstacles and challenges in yourself. So this helps you to discover more self-awareness. Number, number 7, eat healthy. We know that when we eat better, we feel better. Life is really challenging, so we need to become more self-aware. Eating the right foods helps us to be in the best ultimate health, both physically and mentally. What you eat affects how you feel. So these are some good foods to strive for to eat. So number 1, seek out food rich in vitamin B12 and folic acid. Enjoy fruits and vegetables. Eat selenium-rich foods every day. Example, whole grains. Eat fish several times a week. Get a daily dose of vitamin D, whether it's supplements or just walking outside and getting some fresh sun. Treat yourself to 1 ounce of dark chocolate and avoid these foods. Reduce foods high in saturated fat, limit alcohol carefully, and reduce your caffeine intake. And this is the end of my presentation. So I'd like to say thank you, and thank you for taking the time to follow my presentation. Have a great day. Take care. All the best.